All right, first power rankings back from the All-Star break, week 17 edition. I'm pretty sure it is now. And right away, I do have to apologize, as this is probably going to be on the shorter end of these power rankings videos, even with it having been longer since the last one because of the All-Star break. Because, well, the Kraken played yesterday, and then I wasn't quite able to get it recorded before the Super Bowl. Then the Super Bowl means that I'm starting recording this pretty late, right before the Kraken start a back-to-back, starting tomorrow or today as of when I release this. So I just don't quite have the time that I usually do. And with that being said, it is kind of a bummer because this has been a crazy shakeup of a power rankings since the beginning of the All-Star break. Well, at least more of a shakeup than we're used to in these power rankings, as a lot of the teams at the top decided to, at least mentally, extend their vacations coming out of the All-Star break, and some of the teams at the bottom definitely have picked things up and closed that gap to the group that's been living at the top for quite a while. That doesn't necessarily mean that all those teams have dropped, but there definitely have been some significant moves, at least within the top 10. Although with that being said, since a lot of the teams at the bottom of the top 10 from the last power rankings did do a lot of winning coming back from the break, it does mean that it was hard to break into the top 10 for some of the teams that have also been playing well right on the bubble. Philadelphia nearly made it in with 3 straight wins coming out of their break, but because they were kind of scuffling going in and already outside, I didn't quite think they could jump into this top 10 just yet, but we could throw them an honorable mention. Detroit, kind of a similar thing, not quite as hot coming out of the break, but they were much hotter going into it, still just outside of it. But the one team that did make the jump into the top 10, and is at least a new face from the last video, though we have seen them in quite a lot of these power rankings, is the Vegas Golden Knights in the 10th spot. Now, obviously, it's been a big week in Vegas with the Super Bowl that, thankfully and gloriously, the 49ers blew once again to lose to the Chiefs. But as far as the Golden Knights are concerned, they've returned from their All-Star break with 2 straight wins, including coming back with that 3-1 win that snapped the historic winning streak of the Edmonton Oilers, and then followed that up with a 3-2 win, also in regulation, over the Arizona Coyotes. So 2 pretty quality wins. Obviously, the Oilers one sticks out a lot more than the Coyotes one, but the Coyotes are still a team that are vying for a playoff spot in the West. So, a pretty strong return for a Golden Knights team that was starting to slide their way into potentially actually falling below the Oilers had they lost that game, and the Oilers kept that streak going. Then in the 9th spot, I have the Winnipeg Jets, who did pretty much hold on to their spot in this top 10 because of their ability to at least hold on to get that 2-1 win against the Penguins to finish off their week. But it was not a strong return, as they lost 3-0 to those Penguins in the return from the break, and then 4-1 to the Flyers, which did also then make it 5 straight losses for the Jets after that hot streak that they were on. So yeah, hopefully, at least for the Jets anyway, this win at the end of the week against the Penguins will get them back on the right track and winning more games than they lose, as they definitely have started to slide a bit in the standings and certainly in these power rankings. And while they're not necessarily in any threat of falling out of the top 3 in the Central, even with the Blues and Predators playing pretty well of late, they are definitely in danger of falling out of this top 10 if this win can't turn into a few more wins in their next few games. I suppose the one piece of good news for the Jets is that the team right above them, not only in the standings, but also in these power rankings in the 8th spot, has also been on quite a bit of a slide here to match that of the Jets. That being the Colorado Avalanche, who had not lost back-to-back games going all the way to the start of December, but now coming out of the break have lost 4 straight on an East Coast road trip. The first one in overtime, but the last 3 in regulation. Now, it has been a tough set of opponents that they've had to face coming out of the break. The 2-1 overtime loss to the Rangers to start things out, then 4-3 to the Devils, 4-2 to the Hurricanes, before getting shut out 4-0 at the hands of the Panthers, who they have not had a good time against this season in the 2 games they've played. But at the same time, for a team as good as the Avalanche, that's really no excuse, and you have to at least put up a bigger fight than they did in at least 3 of those games, as they only scored the 6 goals in those 4 games, and let up 14 in the final 3. And besides, it's not like things are going to get much easier for them here over the next stretch, as each of their next 7 opponents are 500 or better on the season, and 5 of those 7 are currently in a playoff spot. So once again, just like with the Jets, this is another team in the Avalanche that definitely needs to figure out how to get things turned around if they don't want to end up outside this top 10, and, well, not necessarily in any danger when it comes to the top 3 in the Central, as like the Jets, they do have quite a bit of a buffer over either the Predators or Blues, but it's not a good direction they're headed in, while both of those teams are headed upwards. Getting back to some teams that actually are headed in the right direction though, up next in the 7th spot, I've got the Carolina Hurricanes, who did start off their return from the break with a loss, but a close one 3-2 to the Vancouver Canucks. so not a terrible loss against a very good team, and they do keep it closer than a lot of teams in the NHL have. And then they followed up with 2 wins, a decisive one against the Colorado Avalanche, the 5-2 one that we just mentioned, and then a 1-0 overtime win against the Devils. So for the Hurricanes, they continue this at least steady march upwards in the standings. I mean, I guess they haven't really moved up in the standings in quite a while, but they continue to win the vast majority of their games and at least keep the pressure on the Rangers for that top spot in the Metro. And plus for the Canes, it has to be at least a good sign that they only give up those 5 goals in 3 games, with goaltending having been largely the culprit when things haven't been going well for this team so far this season. Moving on though, in the 6th spot, I have another team that's 2-1 since the return in the Dallas Stars, who are also the team that's taken advantage of that fall of both of their rivals for that top spot in the Central. Now, sure, it might not have been the most convincing 2-1 record over the last week, as they do get a 2-1 win over the Sabres, then a 3-2 win over Montreal, on either side of a 5-4 loss to Toronto. So yes, they do end up losing to the one of the 3 teams that's actually in a playoff spot, but they still do pick up 4 out of 6 points, and in the end, that's pretty much all they need to do to move up in the standings, while, again, those other 2 teams that they're fighting for that top spot in the Central with are losing consistently. And besides, that loss to the Leafs was a close one on the second half of a back-to-back with Wedgwood and net, so at the very least, you're getting good starts out of Ottinger in the return from the break, and he has now won each of his last 5 starts. As we move into the top 5 though, the next team here in the 5th spot in the Edmonton Oilers has not had as good of a return from the break as the last 2, as they had not only their winning streak snapped, but also lost to the team that they're trying to keep ahead of in the standings in the Kings to finish things off. Now, they do pick up a win against the Ducks, but it's the Ducks, and they still gave up 3 goals to them, so while the goaltending had really been carrying them throughout that 16-game winning streak, suddenly things have cooled off there at least a little bit. I mean, I suppose that Skinner does just give up the 2 goals to Vegas, and the third one's an empty netter. Then it's Picard in net against the Ducks, who gives up the 3, and then Skinner does give up 3 against the Kings on 26 shots, or I think it was 25 shots, so not the best outing against the Kings, and I guess it really is more the offensive side of things that's more to blame for those 2 losses, as they do pick up just that 1 goal between the loss to Vegas and the loss to LA. Both teams that they're right between in the standings. And not that it's time to panic by any means for the Oilers, at least not just yet anyway, as they still are playing pretty well defensively, which has been historically the problem with this team, and you'd think if anything they could figure out the offensive side of it. They still do now, like I said with the Avalanche, have a pretty tough schedule coming up, with each of their next 12 opponents having a NHL 500 record or better, and 7 of those currently in a playoff spot. So while that historic winning streak did save their season, and paired with the Kings' collapse for a bit got them into the top 3 in the Pacific, they're still not that far ahead of the Kings by points, and if they do start to slow down here, they could find themselves back in that pack of teams fighting for those wildcard spots. In 4th, though, I have a team in the Rangers that definitely does not have to worry about their spot in the playoffs, or at least getting there anyway, as they still sit above the Metro, thanks in large part to a hot return from the break, with 4 straight wins now and 3 since returning here in February. 2 of them are overtime wins, including one against the Blackhawks, which obviously isn't the most quality overtime win, but it's a win nonetheless. They also win in overtime against Colorado, a much better opponent, and get a regulation win 3-1 over Tampa Bay, who has been playing very well of late. And of course, as has been true pretty much all season long, this new winning streak for the Kings is helped out in large part by 3 straight wins from Jonathan Quick, who did get the start in the first 3 of those 4 straight wins, including the first 2 back from the break, in which he just gave up 1 goal in each of those 2 games. So for the Rangers, while Shesterkin probably still is the starter, I'd say almost certainly, especially when it comes time for the playoffs, it definitely will help for them in those playoffs to have a goaltender like Quick, who's not only very experienced, but also experienced in the postseason, to be able to spell Shesterkin here and there when he needs it. Then moving up to the 3rd spot after a bit of a tumble down the rankings, now back up into this top 3, I have the Florida Panthers, who probably would have been in the 2nd, maybe even 1st spot, if it wasn't for starting out their return with a 2-1 loss to the Flyers. But then they bounced back with a 4-2 win over the Capitals, and that 4-0 shutout of the Avalanche that we already mentioned. So for the Panthers, they definitely continue to head in the right direction, with a 6-2-2 record in their last 10, and are just a couple points behind the Bruins for that top spot in the Atlantic. And for that matter, if things keep going the way for the Panthers that they have since the middle of January, they might not have too much trouble passing the Bruins for that top spot in the Atlantic, as they have now won, like I said, 6 of their last 7 games, and all 7 of those games they've allowed 2 or fewer goals, all the while giving a pretty good platoon between Stolarz and Bobrovsky. And And if they can get that good of goaltending, just like we talked about with the Rangers, out of both of their goaltenders, that does, again, set them up very well for the playoffs as well, which they should have no trouble making, as they and the Bruins do have a bit of a gap on what's now the Lightning in the third spot in the Atlantic, with the two of those blue and white teams kind of flip-flopping between who's going to be in the third spot in the Atlantic and who's going to be fighting for a wildcard spot. And that brings us to the top two, who are still the same top two teams as it's been for a few weeks now, in the Bruins and Canucks. Although, like I said, I nearly put the Panthers above both of these teams, as neither one had particularly convincing returns from the break. And what makes it even more complicated as to deciding which of these two teams to put in first and which one in second is that the team that's had the worst return from the break in the Bruins also won the head-to-head matchup between they and the Canucks, as they do win pretty decisively in that game, the second one back for both of the teams, 4-0 over Vancouver. But at the same time, they also decisively lose each of their other two games. 4-1 at the hands of the Flames and 3-0 shutout after shutting out the Canucks at the hands of the Capitals. Meanwhile, the Canucks, in spite of losing to the Bruins pretty badly, do go 2-0-1 in their other three games, beating the Hurricanes and an overtime win against that same Capitals team, as well as an overtime loss at the hands of Detroit. So on the one hand, we have a Bruins team who have been pretty close to the Canucks in that second spot for quite a while now, and then beat them decisively 4-0, which usually would be enough to just take that spot outright, and it would be kind of fun to have a team other than Canucks in the first spot for a while now. But then the Canucks are straight up just the better team other than that one game since the return from the break, and still did have the first spot, so the Bruins have to do something decisive to take it from them. In the end, for me, it's pretty much a coin flip between these two teams. So then the tiebreaker, I'm just going to go with the standings, where the Canucks still do have a 3-point lead on the Bruins, with just one more game having been played. So I guess for me then, it's still the Canucks number 1 and the Bruins number 2, though both of them could be passed by the Panthers. I mean, pretty quickly here again, the Panthers, had they won that game that they ended up losing 2-1, I probably would have bumped them above both of these teams. For now though, Canucks 1, Bruins 2, Panthers 3, and the rest of the pack trying to catch up. That having been said, if you disagree with me, I would understand, and I'd love to hear about it down in the comment section, what your top 10 would look like, what teams you would move up or down, what things I left out, again having to leave quite a bit out because of the time crunch with this video. And in that vein, I'm going to close things out here, so if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy the video, which if you've made it to this point, you probably did at least one of those things, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below that help support the channel, so I'd appreciate you using them. Like and subscribe, of course. And until next time, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken! Hopefully they can turn things around, as they really need to get into a playoff spot themselves.